The ANU's Mount Stromlo Observatory is one of them.
I love doing it. I love talking about it. I think people feel that. And I love talking about it because it is so now tangible. In the 90s, it wasn't tangible. You know, yeah, things happen and there was things happening and it was cool. All right, but that's it. But it feels so real now. It feels so accessible.
When people like Brad Tucker talk about how space will change our lives in the near future, the big focus is on cheap global broadband that will drive even more rapid technological development.
The real big market that's developing now is broadband internet from space. There's 3 or 4 companies that are launching thousands of satellites into low Earth orbit that are going to beam down broadband all over the Earth. And the speeds are 2 to 3 times faster than the NBN.
This is a big project that lots of companies are doing, OneWeb, Starlink, Amazon. The fact that for a fraction of the cost of the NBN, we can get terabyte per second downloads, that transforms the way we work. And we're not talking about in cities. You can be in the middle of a rural town in Australia and have the same connection speed as a city, and better than what we have right now. You know, you can only imagine that's going to transform. The fact that we're going to get GPS accurate to the scale of centimeters. We're not even talking about tens of meters. The scale of centimeters means, the data freeze for farmers and tracking and navigation is an order of magnitude better.
We're getting into the age where it's not just people that are being connected, it's machines. It's business to business, machine to machine, machine to person. And the implications for that are enormous. Who can say exactly what they are? What we'll see unfold in the next small number of years will probably be quite staggering.
The actual deployment of the bow tie antenna.
At the University of New South Wales campus in Canberra, Russell Boyce and his team are working with Defence on research to develop small next-generation satellites for potential intelligence gathering.
If we can have a lot of these in orbit, they'll be able to bounce signals from one to the next to the next. Yeah, it's not just a boom, it's a frenzy. Australia has by far the fastest growing space sector in the world, the fastest rate of establishment of startups of any space economy anywhere in the world.
In June, they launched the latest of their so-called Cube satellites.
Southern Ocean.
We can fly these small space missions to demonstrate the art of the possible. That's what we're doing in collaboration with the Air Force. That's what we seek to do for government, for industry partners. Our vision is to be a significant contributor to this development of networked, intelligent constellation capabilities. And every mission that we fly is a step towards that.
Satellite technology is evolving fast, and Australian scientists are at the forefront of the new developments that will deliver a huge array of applications.
And when you think about the first satellites and the size that they needed to be in order to be able to get these sorts of images of the Earth, now this is really a whole new world that we're in with these CubeSats, very small satellites, very miniaturised, and of course, cheaper and quicker to get up. But it will let us look at things like ground cover across Australia. So, for example, deforestation or flooding. It will let us see through smoke and see what's happening in bushfires. And it will let us look at how clouds are formed, for example, and see the creation of cyclones.
With more and more countries now launching their own technology, low Earth orbit is fast becoming a very crowded space.
There are still tens of thousands of satellites planned to go up in sort of like nets around the Earth, and they're a problem if they're not monitored. If they're in very low Earth orbit, sort of the 200 to 300K, they will decay very quickly, and so their lifespan's only a year or two, so the chances of them actually causing any trouble is not very high.
If you put too many in orbit, it is a challenge. That's a daily operational challenge for the world in operating the space technologies that we do depend upon. there is a growing area called space traffic management. It's an activity being built upon space situational awareness, led by the US, but Australia is a key player, as are many other nations, in understanding what's going on up there, keeping track of it, predicting collisions, and trying to avoid it.
If you think about the time from when Sputnik went up in 1957 to now, the world has probably launched, let's say, 6,000 to 7,000 objects into space. If you just take the well-publicised plans of one or two or three companies, we're talking about an additional, let's say, 80,000. We've had collisions in space. We've had near misses in space. Everything that's in space above about, let's say, 500 or 600 kilometres above mean sea level, it's travelling at, very, very fast speeds, depending on where they are, but maybe somewhere between 7 to 15 kilometres a second. So even something the size of a small bolt will destroy anything it hits, of course cascading into more debris.
Accidents will happen, mistakes will happen. The more we grow in that dependency, the more those things will happen. We will have space disasters for tourists. We will have satellites colliding and triggering geopolitical tensions. That is just going to happen. So it's the need for society, the need for people to make sure we put a check and balance on what that possibility is, and have our policymakers and scientists think of those other things to make sure we can control it.
Space analyst Malcolm Davis has been one of those focused on the potential benefits of space exploration. But he is also well aware of the potential dangers, including the militarisation of space.
You are seeing a recognition now that space is contested. It's not this serene, peaceful sanctuary that sits untouched by terrestrial geopolitics. Instead, it's a warfighting domain where you have major powers like China and Russia developing counter-space capabilities, anti-satellite weapons designed to deny the US and its allies, including Australia, access to critical space support in a future conflict.
The more dependent we become on satellite technology, the more vulnerable we are.
An attack on our critical satellites could cause much of our society to grind to a halt. And then if we can't recover that effectively, you're in a sort of like a Mad Max world where everything falls apart and our economy collapses.
Shock and awe, as we saw in the Iraq invasion, will not be what it was. You disable a country's satellite network, you disable a country. That's the simple fact. And you can then see how some of the superpowers, some of the other countries, you change a policy, you change a government, all of a sudden you don't want to behave with your friends or your enemies, and you can isolate, you can block off a country from accessing the other technology in the world, and that's how you enclose them, and that's how you control them. And this is not just these dreamt up ideas. People are doing this already.
Russell Boyce believes it's essential for Australia's security to be self-reliant in space.
It's extremely important to have our own sovereign control of satellites. It's important, well, from national security reasons. We need to be in control of the technologies that provide us the information that we need to keep Australia secure. But in a commercial sense as well.
In July, the US Space Command announced that it had evidence Russia had tested a space-based anti-satellite weapon.
It was clearly a weapons test. It was an anti-satellite weapon designed to hit and destroy a target satellite, one of ours. It wasn't tested against one of ours, but nevertheless the message was sent that Russia is developing that capability. China has similar capabilities. And I think that we have to recognise that in a future war, either prior to a conflict or during a conflict, our satellites will be attacked.
The potential for war in space is a real possibility. Both China and Russia have arms of their military dedicated to space. Last year, Donald Trump established the newest branch of the armed forces, to deter aggression in and from space and to protect the interests of the US beyond the Earth.
This is a very big and important moment. It's called the Space Force. Space. Going to be a lot of things happening in space, because space is the world's newest warfighting domain. Amid grave threats to our national security, American superiority in space is absolutely vital. And we're leading, but we're not leading by enough, but very shortly we'll be leading by a lot. The Space Force will help us deter aggression and control the ultimate high ground.
We're going to have to defend ourselves in space.
The establishment of the new US Space Force came 2 years after Russia announced it had built a hypersonic missile. Unveiling the new Space Force flag in the Oval Office, Trump announced the US had something even bigger.
We have, I call it the super duper missile. And I heard the other night 17 times faster than what they have right now. Then you take the fastest missile we have right now. You've heard Russia has 5 times, and China's working on 5 or 6 times. We have one 17 times, and it's just gotten the go-ahead. 17 times faster, if you can believe that, General. That's something, right? 17 times faster than what we have right now. Fastest in the world by a factor of almost 3. So I just want to congratulate everybody and thank everybody. Space is going to be, it's going to be the future, both in terms of defense and offense and so many other things. And already, from what I'm hearing and based on reports, we're now the leader in space.
It's only a matter of time before we start seeing real space conflicts. I think when people heard of Space Force, everyone thought it was a joke. People tend to forget President Obama asked Space Force to be started, but the Pentagon at the time said we don't really need it. Even Reagan in the 80s flagged something like this. If you need space to critically operate on Earth, the advantage of operation on Earth is controlling space. It's pretty simple. The boundaries are less clear in space. You can clearly see when someone invades your country or someone launches an attack on your country. Those areas are very gray in space.
The consequences of war in space would be truly mind-boggling.
If we lose control of space, we lose the war and we lose it quickly. The Chinese understand our dependency on space systems to fight, and so therefore they're going to target and have the ability to take out those critical space systems, the satellites and the ground links between the Earth and the satellites.
If we see a full-scale war, we're talking about satellites being disabled. It's not missiles, it's not Star Wars, but we have lasers that disable things. That's just a technology we have. We have satellites that can steer and interfere. You can have kamikaze satellites. So what we'll see is the tampering, the disabling, the interfering with networks on the Earth. And then the conflicts that we have, not even around the Earth, but on the moon, on asteroids, on Mars. Space piracy, a real thing that's going to happen.
There are no rules around conflict in space. Space lawyer Stephen Freeland says space is still something of a legal black hole. A new arm of legal study has developed to try and deal with it.
Clearly, the rules of war that we have, and I've mentioned Geneva Conventions, but there's lots of others, all of those were developed for terrestrial warfare, by and large. Space is a unique environment. The consequences, let's say, of blowing up a satellite in terms of the formation of debris are unique to space and would have long-lasting consequences.
Пошел спутник.
So automatically, that alters the way that you might be asking the relevant questions that you ask on Earth about perhaps undertaking a military operation or striking something.
It's not just nation-states that could be attacking each other in this new military theatre. Cheaper access to space has also potentially opened up a new galaxy of opportunity for global disruption. The threat of galactic terrorism, for instance, is no longer science fiction.
The benefit of everything being cheap is a lot more people can do it. The negative of everything being cheap is a lot more people can do it. And that regulation, that control just isn't there because it was never envisioned to be there.
A big concern of mine is what's known as soft kill counter space, whereas rather than physically destroying a satellite and creating a huge cloud of space debris that essentially denies space for everyone, you have technologies such as cyber attack on satellites that actually simply disable or damage or deny a satellite temporarily, but leave that satellite intact. So you could have non-state actors or even individuals hacking satellites and denying space to others. And I think that's a concern for the future.
While the low Earth orbit satellite zone is quickly becoming a contested space, human ambition is pushing well beyond that to a new frontier.
Coming up on 30 seconds into flight, the RD-180 is throttling down as expected. Engine response.
Sending people to Mars is now humanity's next great leap forward.
We're sending a lot of missions to Mars because we think it may hold signs of life. And that is a very important, I think, existential question. Are we alone in the universe? How did life form here on Earth? Mars may hold that key, and I think that's really cool. How did Mars change geologically, environmentally? What does that tell us for our Earth? That's a very important question. So there's a lot of rich science to explore on Mars. But then there's also that human conquest of, we want to send a human there, we want boots on the ground.
But planting footprints on the red planet will require a